Hello and welcome. As you just heard, I'm Peter Templeton, President and CEO of the Cradle Products Innovation Institute, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Circular Shift and to moderate our final panel of the day. Our final session, as Marissa mentioned, is entitled Harnessing the Power of Purchasing Decisions, focusing on how to future-proof sourcing practices and consumer choices. In this discussion, we'll be building upon themes from our earlier sessions today and hear from three top experts on the role of purchasing decisions in realizing the vision of a circular economy, this current state and latest sustainability and circularity trends in public procurement and consumer choices, and how Cradle to Cradle Certified can facilitate and encourage governments, business, and consumer purchasing decisions that advance circular and sustainability goals. I'm extremely excited to explore these topics with our panelists today, but first I'd like to provide some brief context for our discussion. We now consume more than 100 billion tons of materials annually, an amount that has tripled over the last 50 years and is projected to increase by another 70% by 2050 without dramatic change in our current levels of consumption. Yet according to the latest Circularity Gap report released in January, the global economy is still only 8.6% circular. That is, less than 9% of global materials consumed are kept in productive cycles of use, and that number has decreased from 2 years ago. For those of us working every day to advance the circular economy, we know that much of our success will boil down to what values and outcomes are prioritized in the purchasing decisions being made by governments, businesses, and consumers. The UN Sustainable Development Goals and the Decade of Action have provided a common framework to focus efforts on an investment on collective priorities to drive meaningful progress on addressing our latest global challenges. But here again, much of our success will rely on ensuring access to reliable data on impacts and aligning priorities with values-based buying practices. Fortunately, individual and institutional investors have placed higher levels of scrutiny on the ESG performance of companies and prioritizing investment in companies leading in sustainable, responsible, and equitable practices. This is driving companies to look not only at their own operations, but also their impacts across the supply chain and their ability to align around shared goals with suppliers and customers. Its focus translates to the public sector as well. State, local, and federal governments are recognizing the enormous influence they have through their purchasing power. In OECD countries, government buying represents an average of 12% of national GDP and as much as 30% in developing countries. Procurement is pivotal to realizing circular economy, turning design intentions into deliverables and policy into practice. It is much more than simply shopping for supplies. It is the interface with parties upstream in the value chain, and it's a clear reflection of our personal and institutional priorities. And circularity is just beginning to emerge among them. Consumer shopping behavior is changing. Beliefs are driving buying practices. Consumers shop for good. Nearly 6 in 10 consumers are willing to change their purchasing habits to reduce negative impact on the environment, and those who say these traits are very important, over 7 in 10 are willing to pay a premium as high as 35% for brands that support recycling, practice sustainability, and are environmentally responsible. As you've heard throughout our program today, the Cradle to Cradle Certified Product Standard is a framework for guiding the design, manufacturing, and selection of better products and materials. Cradle to Cradle Certified readily identifies products that are safe for humans and the environment, are designed for continuous cycles of use and reuse in a circular economy, protect our climate and safeguard our air, soil, and water resources, and ensure fair, safe, and equitable labor practices. Across these categories, Cradle to Cradle Certified provides a one standard solution for verifying progress towards achievement of critical sustainability and ESG goals. Our community recognizes that the products we design and make today define the world we will inhabit tomorrow. The same can be said about the products we buy. Our purchasing decisions affect not only our personal well-being and environment, but also the health, sustainability, economy, and equity of our communities. So in today's session, we want to address how we ensure that these decisions help us advance the goals and values we have for our organizations and our communities and for our own lives. I'm delighted to be joined today by three distinguished experts on the topic of responsible sourcing. Alison Kinn Bennet is Senior Advisor in the United States Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention and an adjunct instructor in American University's Kagod School of Business. Alison has served in the Environmentally Preferable Purchasing Program since 2001. Donna Westerman is an ESG and supply chain disruption business leader and consultant who's been working with Fortune 500 clients for over 25 years. Donna previously served as the Chief Executive Officer of the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council. And Adam Werbach is Global Lead for Sustainable Shopping at Amazon. Adam served as the National President of the Sierra Club and on the board of Greenpeace International, and later went on to help companies launch sustainable products as the Chief Sustainability Officer for Saatchi & Saatchi. Welcome, Alison, Donna, and Adam.
Thank you.
We are extremely fortunate to have all of you with us today. Before we dive into our discussion, I want to quickly remind our audience to submit questions for all of you. We'll try to cover as many of them as possible before the end of the session, but let's go ahead and get started. Alison, I'd like to begin with you. From your organizational experience and years of experience, how do you see the state of responsible sourcing today?
Great event. I haven't gotten out much lately, so thank you for having me and recognizing the relevance of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to this conversation. Responsible sourcing has arrived. The power of purchasing, as we've been discussing today, to help solve so many of the world's challenges is really being recognized. And it's not just Scope 3 emissions, but Scope 3 water use, Scope 3 conflict or critical minerals, Scope 3 toxic exposures, Scope 3 justice issues, and so many more. But I really understand that the challenge ahead is overwhelming. Global supply chains are complex, sustainability impacts are complex, and institutional purchasing decision-making is complex. I'm really optimistic, though. I've been with EPA's Environmentally Preferable Purchasing Program for 20 of its almost 30 years, where we've been trying to help the U.S. federal government lead by example. It's been really rewarding to see purchasing a key strategy in President Biden's executive orders on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. The one in February around America's supply chains regarding critical minerals, and purchasing is also mentioned in the climate-related financial risk on May 20th, which was signed. So I'm really excited about this recognition in policy at the federal level. I'm also really excited about the great advancements in the tools that responsible sourcing needs and that purchasers need. From life cycle assessment and footprinting and hand printing and spend analysis, safer chemistries are available, materials passports, products as a service models, improved infrastructure and upcycling facilities, and of course, last but not least, robust eco-labels. These innovations are making sustainable acquisition easier, more strategic, more impactful. So it gives me a lot of hope around the state of responsible sourcing. And I just, on a personal note, while my daughters roll their eyes at me a lot of the time, I'm really hopeful about the future consumer, seeing them think that thrifting and the share economy is cool. So I'm again quite hopeful about the future consumer.
That's fantastic reference. And I'll say that those of us that work in this sphere, your peers, think the work that you do in your day job is also very cool. So I'm glad to see that there's this connection between that work and, of course, the next generation that's relying on us to make some things happen here. We've been incredibly fortunate to benefit from the work that you have done and led here in the US. And we also see that it has implications more broadly. The point that you've just made about how this extends now into next generations and personal consumers is a perfect transition for us. We want to understand the motivations of those individuals and organizations that are prioritizing responsible sourcing. So I actually want to turn to Adam for your perspective on what are the drivers for the urgency and the uptick of better purchasing practices for both businesses and consumers at this point, and how is sustainable sourcing critical for tomorrow's business success?
Well, thanks for having me, and it's an honor to be here on behalf of Amazon, and really want to thank the Cradle Institute and the certification for being a key partner to Amazon at identifying more sustainable products for customers. The largest driver for us is the customer. We wake up every morning and are obsessed with the customer and asking, what does the customer want? And the customer wants more sustainable products. And we are kind of running as fast as we can to make sure that everything that Amazon makes and sells is more sustainable. But we actually just need more products. We don't have the types of products that offer what the customer is looking for, which is a promise, right? They're looking to come in and find something that just works just as well or better and is at the same price, is just as convenient to do something to actually have an impact on the planet. And our job is to really try to help create the situation where that becomes available. In terms of drivers, things are just changing really rapidly. Like if you open up a refrigerator of our customer, if they have ice cream, there's a good chance there's non-dairy ice cream in there as well, dairy and non-dairy. If they live in a city, there's probably a bike share. If they get a package from Amazon, pretty soon that'll be carbon zero being sent to you. So this is in the water that we're all drinking. And we have to run out really fast, getting more products quickly to what the customer wants, to match what the customer wants. What we are also hearing is the customer doesn't want a lot of complexity. We were talking recently to some customers and showing them some ideas of how we could show them kind of more complex ways to see the transparency of products. And one customer said, "Look, I just want to buy laundry detergent. Please don't make me do math." And I think that's like the challenge for us, is that we need to actually make this really simple for them. They want to get their things and move on. And that's why marks like Cradle to Cradle are so important, because they help a customer just really see, oh yeah, okay, I can trust that this product is more sustainable for the planet, is more sustainable for the people on the planet as well. And that's what our aspiration is to fill our shelves with those products so customers just default to the more sustainable option.
Oh, that is fantastic. So more sustainable products and simpler decision making. I really value having the view that you have, the insight that you have into the consumer mindset around this topic, because it is one of the most challenging aspects to really determine what are the values we're trying to connect to and how is it that we convey this information on what can be very, very complex topics in a way that can be readily absorbed by all consumers, be it business buyers as well as individual buyers. So this is part of the challenge that we all face, but hopefully part of the solution that we can bring forward. So understanding these drivers is key, but those drivers are based on expectations of what goals sustainable purchasing will achieve and what effort is required to achieve them. So Donna, I'd like to know from you, how has the definition of sustainable purchasing or procurement evolved over the last few years? How is purchasing for a circular economy currently being discussed in the market?
Well, thank you for having me, Peter, and it's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues. And also being a loyal Amazon shopper, it's wonderful to hear all the good work that Adam, you are a part of. To be honest, Peter, even before sustainable procurement or purchasing, back in the day, it was just good old purchasing. And purchasing was about securing a finished good at the most economical price point, ensuring quality and ensuring that the finished goods would be delivered where they're going to go on time and efficiently. And then the world got a bit more transparent and we started hearing language like CSR and, all of a sudden purchasing became strategic sourcing. It became sustainable purchasing, sustainable procurement. And what did that mean? What that meant in supply chains was that we were getting a little bit more transparent. We were now really concerned, about the complexities of the supply chain. Depending on the sector, I'll focus in on ag and CPG, all the way from, the ground to like farm to fork, let's say, but also in finished goods of plastics and such. Sustainable procurement really started to hone in on things way beyond ensuring, a fair and equitable price. And I put that language in there very mindfully with regards to equitable, because what we learned in transparency, especially at a factory level, was sometimes those low price points, there was a price to pay for them. And that was looking at, factory level audits and looking at farms and things 30 years ago, these things weren't done. But looking at things like, unfair labor practices and discrimination against women and modern slavery and child labor and all of these, incredibly important issues that, cannot be tackled by one company alone. So sustainable procurement then took on several legs of its own. So again, beyond the price points, it also looked at the social and economic impact, and the footprint that that particular company was leaving at different various levels, in their supply chain. And to date, I can state from the companies that I worked for, as well as who are my clients, that there's still not 100% transparency in very complicated consumer products groups. The work is out there, it's being done, but it's not quite there yet. So with regards to mindset, we've certainly gone from the take, make, and dispose, right? The original purchasing model to something much more mindful, and that's with the circular economy, to really look at how are we going to create items that all parts of the supply chain potentially can be reused, to really minimize the use of resources and, reduce the creation of waste, pollution, and carbon emissions. I think some of the drivers in this, when I was just recently pulling some data, is really, and I think this will serve as a good foundation for, the rest of our conversation, is the rise of the middle class. If we look at the stats and the demands of the middle class, we're looking at an increase of 3 billion people by 2030. So those needs and demands are going to certainly increase. So rather than that old model of take, make, and dispose, to build things and make things more efficient, and we can repurpose that, and its longevity, becomes, quite critical, we'll be able to serve the masses. So that's where I see the evolution.
Thank you. Very, very great insights into this. And I think a bunch of things are packed in there. First, for all of us that are so passionate about the underlying issues that we're trying to address, we keep trying to expand upon that definition of what we're trying to address across companies here. But that is part of what is adding to the complexity, having to understand not only what it means, but how you actually achieve it. So that is something, and then how you make that accessible and how that information translates effectively to the consumer. So I'll turn back to Adam and Alison here. Each of you are responsible for shaping programs that drive and enable informed purchasing decisions. So I'd be interested for you to describe how your programs and initiatives address sustainability and circularity as part of the sustainable purchasing decisions and process. And since many of our audience members are from our community, what role does Cradle to Cradle Certified play in that?
Alison, why don't you go first?
Okay.
Sorry.
Great. Thank you. Well, as Peter mentioned, I sit in EPA's Environmentally Preferable Purchasing Program, which is in the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. But we work across the agency, really across the federal government's expertise, to take a really holistic life cycle based approach to defining environmentally preferable. I guess given today's theme, though, I'm going to focus on 3 major ways that we spur circularity in EPA's EPP program. First, we encourage procurement of services, so the product servicizing model, really to optimize circularity opportunities. Think janitorial services instead of buying the cleaning product, print management services instead of buying the copiers and the printers. Those models, of course, you need cleaning products that are safer and printers that are efficient and meet strict environmental performance criteria. But the servicizing model encourages our federal contractors to sustainably manage the goods they're using. Second, we engage in the development of product sustainability standards that increase circular design. So, for example, I coordinate U.S. government participation in the development of Cradle to Cradle, NSF, ASTM, and a bunch of other standards used in the building and infrastructure sectors. My team also engages in IT, electronics, professional services, and other key sectors with significant federal spend. And we work really hard to build circularity into the core of these standards with criteria such as incentivizing the use of more recycled materials, including critical materials, using materials that are easier to recycle and or reuse, using safer chemicals to facilitate that cycling, designing for ease of disassembly while maintaining the product lifespan and durability. Also, things like ensuring availability of spare parts is pretty critical to this conversation. And of course, take back programs. If we can build those right into the forefront thinking and a sustainability standard for a purchase category, it helps. And I've seen Cradle to Cradle's criteria influence other standards and eco-labels I've been engaged with. And certainly Cradle to Cradle is being used in federal purchasing to meet our sustainability goals, which bring me to the third way our program spurs circularity is that we recommend standards and eco-labels that incentivize these approaches. Currently, EPA's recommendations of specifications, standards, and eco-labels cover 25 product categories, and more than 40 standards and eco-labels are included there, including Cradle to Cradle. Our recommendations were required under Obama. They were made voluntary under the last administration, and we're waiting to see what will happen and how they'll be implemented and expanded under the Biden administration.
Fantastic. Thank you. Adam, can you add to that from the Amazon perspective?
Sure. So, Amazon took a big step in making the climate pledge now almost 2 years ago, which was a commitment to get to the level of Paris, climate neutral by 2040, 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement, which has really been a driver across Amazon. And it's also been an opportunity through the co-founding the climate pledge with Global Optimism to partner with other companies to make that same commitment. And that's really bubbled down into our customer experience now too. So the work that I do in sustainable shopping is ensuring that customers actually can see and find more sustainable products as they shop and go about their everyday shopping journeys. Almost a year ago, actually not quite, in September and October, we launched Climate Pledge Friendly, which is our flagship sustainable shopping program. And what that does is it helps customers find, identify, and purchase more sustainable products. And we define those by products that actually have a small number of very high bar certifications. Cradle to Cradle is obviously the example we're talking about today. Those products are then badged with it's a little hourglass with a winged hourglass, which suggests that time is short. We have to act now. That is next to the product in search results, as well as on the detail page. And for anyone who shopped on Amazon, there's very few badges that actually come up in search results, sort of like Amazon's Choice or pieces like that. So it's a suggestion of how important we believe this is to our customers, is for them to be able to see right when they're searching, right in those results, that these are more sustainable options. So once they click into it, they see on the detail page why it's certified. They can click all the way through to Cradle's site and understand that this product actually has these sustainability benefits. But for them, when I mentioned complexity before, it's a really easy way, a very simple way for them to feel confident that the product that they're looking for is a more sustainable option. Our job now is to make that grow, like to find, as I said, more products, and hopefully from folks here, we want to encourage you in anything you can do to get those products out there, because we want them. We want to put them in front of our customers, and we want to demonstrate there's going to be lift if you actually get them certified, and we put them in front of customers and show them that these are better options for them. We're already seeing some really promising results based on it, but it's really just the beginning of the journey right now. We're live in the United States, and then Spain, Italy, UK, Germany, and France. And we're now expanding both how the program shows up on the site in other parts of Amazon, as well as expanding to more countries.
Which is fantastic. In this case, we've seen from both of you examples of how you've opened up channels to make this information more accessible, to help encourage the right practices, but also, pushed a bit in terms of encouraging and recognizing the steps that need to be taken because of that urgency that Adam has just referenced. And that's critically important. We're very honored to contribute to the work that both of you are doing within those platforms that you have created, and see that this is something that extends far beyond the reach of any of our individual capabilities. So this partnership element of it becomes incredibly important for us to be able to rely on the experiences and leverage, I think, the growing language momentum behind this conversation that's happening both in business and government and among consumers. So thank you all for the contributions there. Back to Donna, I wanted to get a bit of your perspective on this too, because you're working across such a wide spectrum of organizations and sectors. And so from your perspective, I'm really interested to know who currently in implementing sustainable and circular and procurement practices is ahead, businesses or government, and why would you categorize them as such?
Well, I'm going to be politically correct. I'm going to say that I don't think one supersedes the other. When I think of the purchasing power of the government, and I'll say just the U.S., although the European government, the Netherlands and Australia and some of the some of the European bodies and things that exist outside the U.S., in some areas, they are way ahead of the U.S. But if we think about government in general, they are really the drivers, right, of innovation and investment because of the purchasing power that they hold and because of the specs and the criteria that they set out. Those that want to play in the government space or be a subcontractor to a contractor in the government space has really got to meet, that criteria. So the government has the power, right, to draw up on policies and also be very specific on the roles that the buyers in the government play, right? So they can really launch and drive the circular economy in their purchasing decisions. However, it is a partnership, right? So we've gone from the days of vendors and having a transaction to longer term contracts where now these are relationships. So it's a mutual relationship. So if it's good for the supplier and their capital investments and their improvements and what they're doing to make efficient and effective supply chains, it's good for the manufacturer, or it's good for the customer. So I would say government has an enormous role to play here. And again, looking at some of the key areas in which the government can partner with cities, with countries, with companies, corporations, NGOs, philanthropic individuals. We think of just, three major areas that government and companies can play in is food, plastics, and fashion. Right? No matter where you are, those three things are pretty critical. And we look at where food is going, that 80% of food will be consumed by cities by 2050. So that isn't all that far away, So things like, supporting the Paris Agreement and the power that the cities and government have to transform the food direction, and have local sourcing and, more organic products. It becomes quite, an innovative opportunity, because in doing that, you're using local businesses, you're using diverse businesses, you're building the muscle power of the United States and really infusing opportunities into the small and minority and diverse communities. So government for sure, plays a major part, but also corporations, have their fair share. And it not only is it because it's the right thing to do, but companies also want to ensure continuity of supply. They want to reduce their, reputational harm. They want to make sure that not only are they being proactive, but they're following due diligence, methodologies and regulatory requirements to ensure that they are posturing themselves when need be, in a defensive situation. So although there's some logic on this, and fundamentals on why we have to move, in this direction, to me, it's really about continuity of supply. If we don't allocate our resources, better, especially in that plastics area, and recycle, repurpose, we're looking at things for the viewers listening. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation is a wonderful, wonderful resource, but you read their piece on plastics and looking at what the future may be. So a lot of companies can really, remedy this in a short and medium term, time span. But when you think longer term, can you imagine a day where you would print, a blueprint for a product and go somewhere and actually fill up a reusable shampoo bottle, or actually go to a local manufacturer and have your blueprint done, and things are only produced as they're needed? That's some of the far-reaching, discussions that are going on. And we have companies, in the fashion area. We have leaders, and like Burberry, like H&M. There's no socioeconomic draw on this. It's across the gamut. You look at CPG companies and products that by multinationals that we all have, whether it be in our kitchen or in our bathroom. Companies like Mars and P&G, all of them, have a circular economy mindset. They all have publicly stated what their goals are. Some of them are very, very lofty. Many of us, are NGOs and advocates, are certainly watching to see what they're going to do and what's behind the brand and their methodology. So I think together, they can do wonderful things. Circular economy, is certainly a evolution, not a revolution. And no one can do it alone. So I think the combination of the government with the underpinning of their policies and their ability to influence because of the vastness of their purchasing, as well as corporations having to answer to the needs of their customers, and because they want to ensure continuity of supply, they want to make sure that they are not going to exhaust natural resources. I think together it's a perfect marriage.
Yes, and I think there is a good point that we're seeing progress on all fronts, and from that, leadership is emerging. There are those examples, and that can be learned from and shared in all instances. So I don't think it's just politically correct. I do think it's also a really valuable way for us to approach this. Where can we find examples that the rest of us can adopt or follow to perhaps leapfrog over some of the challenges, which is where I want to go next with all three of you. So you're all working across complex supply chains and diverse organizations. So I want to know, what are some of the critical success factors for implementing a sustainable sourcing or purchasing program? And also within that, of course, how is Cradle to Cradle framework enabling better purchasing decisions? So Adam, perhaps we can start with you.
So, I mentioned simplicity and sort of come back to that. It's just there's a level of expertise that we're expecting from our customers right now that's unfair, and it's hard. It's hard to understand why one product is better than another. Is plastic better than glass? Is glass more expensive? It's just complex to figure it all out for them, and we need to simplify it. And then I think is the best possible thing that Cradle to Cradle can do, is to make it easy for customers to feel like they have a trust mark that they can rely on. In terms of success factors, we have a supply problem. Like, candidly, we do not have enough products that are equal or better in terms of performance and price than the ones that they were trying to displace. And when we do, customers will choose them every time. Right? You don't need to make an argument for a customer on an LED light bulb. Like, we had to make an argument about the compact fluorescence, right? Like, the light is bad. It's expensive. It breaks, but now an LED light bulb is just better, right? So you don't need to convince anyone. It's just a better product. So we need that in all of our normal everyday things that we buy, better products. And that's sort of the biggest success factor that we're seeing. Like, how do we encourage folks to do the investment, to make the time to get out there and do it? Because there is a market there. The customers do want that, and we'll put them in front of the customers and promote those better alternatives. But in so many places, we don't have them. They just don't exist. So that's, I think, probably the biggest thing that we're sort of seeing is, like, what do we need to do to unlock the supply of more sustainable products?
And I think those two themes are going to be key takeaways for everyone from this session, about the simplicity and about the availability of products. We need those options, and that is why we are trying to promote greater innovation in this space, so that those products that have equal or better performance among these factors are going to be more readily accessible. So very, very, very much supportive of that line. Alison, can we hear from you a little bit about the critical success factors you think need to be built into sustainable purchasing programs?
Well, at the risk of repeating, because I think it's true, we need these easy buttons for purchasers to address complex environmental and social impacts over the life cycle of products. And our program has been guilty of being the hammer that everything's a nail, that saying. But we really lean hard into working through multi-stakeholder efforts to define sustainability via a standard that has robust criteria that can be third-party verified, and then the purchaser doesn't have to figure out so much. So I'll just keep it at that we need these eco labels that are easy buttons for purchasers.
Fantastic. And Donna, from your perspective?
I really have to mirror what both my colleagues said. I do think that there is some sort of feeling of I'm kind of doing my part if I'm buying something that has that, stamp of approval and it's been certified. I feel really confident that, the company I'm buying from has done their due diligence. I think like some low-hanging fruit, however, is, for all companies as well as, the government to do, a better job of raising awareness, to consumers about the complexity of these tasks. I mean, for a company to state, that they are going to be carbon neutral by, a certain year, and you're saying, wait a minute, that's only 4 years away from now. But I'm in the field and I understand that. But for, your average consumer, what companies go through, to actually make sure that that goal and objective, that target is achievable, is really quite compelling, because as we've said before, it's just not, a company or a sector deciding they're going to do that. This is, the coming together of policy makers and, governments and, NGOs and a variety of people that their input is valuable. It's that, diversity of thought that is going to get us to the finish line. Mm-hmm. So I think the increase in communication, would be very very helpful. And also, this is the time now. We need some radical alternatives, but in order to do that, we need the underpinning of the policies and the diversity of people's contributions.
Well, tying together some of the threads there around the simplicity and the accessibility, as well as the communications component. I mean, a big part of what we're trying to do here is to make what is invisible, these sort of unknowns behind these products and materials, visible or actionable, so that folks can actually make these decisions in a way and understand without adding to the complexity that's already involved with purchasing decisions. So given that each of us has spent our careers working on trying to advance sustainability, I suspect you've all given a lot of thought to how we can make the biggest difference with our efforts and what are some challenges to do so. So I'd like to reflect on that a bit with each of you. So start with Alison. What has to happen for sustainability to be considered and become mainstream in purchasing specifications and selections? What barriers will have to be addressed? Building, I think, on the need for the easy button, but what are some of the factors around that?
Yeah, so many things. I'll call out 3 areas that my program's working on to make sustainable purchasing mainstream. First, again, to be the hammer on this point, but there really, even though there seems like a lot of noise in the marketplace, so many 450 or so eco-labels in the market, trying to get purchasers' attention, there really is still a lack of standardized best practices and performance metrics in some key sectors. So we ask, how do you define a more sustainable fill in the blank? We shouldn't be asking procurement professionals to figure that out each and every time they go to buy something new. Really, we can't ask them to be sustainability experts. So without standardization, we're also finding that manufacturers are getting these inconsistent market signals, potentially slowing down their sustainability actions. So standards and eco-labels provide that easy, consistent way to address these complex areas. We need to fill gaps, and we also need to address greenwashing. So second, for implementation, and this is really more Adam's area of expertise, but we need e-procurement systems that seamlessly incorporate these robust eco-labels and standards and the product registries that support them. And Adam, maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, but there's a lot of challenges with that technology aspect of this, from robust certified product registries with these live data feeds. How do you develop sort of a hierarchy of preference for what the purchaser sees, some choice editing? There's some real ethical potentially concerns amongst others there. Third, and Peter, I'm always hammering on this point, we need calculators that translate. For example, if we buy X many Cradle to Cradle or Green Seal or Eco Logo widgets, my organization can expect Y pounds of pollution prevented, which is equivalent to powering this many homes. This isn't crazy talk. EPA has developed and now the Global Electronics Council, some of you may be familiar with their calculator for EPEAT. They maintain this benefits calculator that allows purchasers to measure and report the environmental benefits gained from purchasing electronic products covered by the EPEAT Eco label. And the benefits calculator also enables purchasers to estimate how they can achieve further environmental reductions by using products longer and responsibly recycling them when taken out of service. FYI, the Java code used to build the EPEAT calculator is posted on EPA's website. I can put that in the chat. Hint, hint, anyone out there interested in building more calculators for robust standards and eco labels, that's a great need.
Great, great. And you will be excited to know there is more work coming on that soon. So this is an area where that partnership that exists among all of the players, the stakeholders in this ecosystem is incredibly important. And we're really excited to be able to partner with some of the other players you've mentioned on the work that we're doing so that we're all able to define and measure the impacts more readily and make that information more visible and actionable. So, Donna, one of the points that we always hear in this conversation around barriers and challenges is that the starting point is cost. So what is it that we can actually do to move beyond the prevailing practice of lowest price at purchase?
Mm-hmm. Well, I am a lover of data, and I think data really drives not only change, but it really drives innovation as well. So I'll answer that by looking at companies' suppliers, believe it or not, and looking at supplier segmentation when you are in a circular economy mode. And what I mean by that is really understanding what you're sourcing from where and assess that against the risk. So if you are buying widgets, a low value item in a high risk country because you're getting a great deal, the other things you have to look at in there are the elements of sustainable purchasing beyond the societal impact, but certainly the environmental impact, what the political environment is, how difficult is it to get raw materials in and finished goods out of that country. So all of a sudden, when you're doing that, pricing is part of the equation, but it's not the overall driver as it used to be in my earlier discussion of back in the purchasing days. It's just one component. Now we have other componentry to think about. We have data to support, why we should source, perhaps, in the country, because we can make a greater impact, on our, emissions goals or on our biodiversity participation. So I think, again, really utilizing data, aligning yourself with, appropriate industry groups, really, engaged and working with, senior managements and at the C-level in the organization to say, what are the right agreements that we should be aligning to? Should we be part of the UN Global Compact? Should we be part of the United, environmental programs? And see, where you are as a company, in the journey of circular procurement and the circular economy. It's not going away. It is our future. There'll be leaders and there'll be laggers, all of which have an important role to play. Laggers sometimes are laggers because they're focused on something else and they'll respect the leaders and kind of tag along. But the leaders, are making a bona fide commitment. And, they are the ones that the business case is done, the data is there to support it, and they're ready to take charge.
So, Adam, can we go to the consumer side of that equation? Because I, as a consumer, and sure, representative of a lot of the folks that you have been working with in your current position and thinking about in your prior positions, working with manufacturers and product brands, how is it that we overcome or connect that decision between sustainability targets that we're trying to advance and achieve and the costs of the products that are available?
Well, we try to break it whenever we can, right? I mean, we try to find a way that we lower the cost for the customers so they don't actually have to make that choice. And we can. in many, many ways, we can do that. We found that in solar. We found that all over the place where we've been able to lower the cost curve by increasing demand. And that's how Amazon works. It works on what we call flywheels, right? Where we increase customer demand that allows manufacturers to innovate and lower the prices to produce something, which then increases demand because the price is lower. So that's what we're really trying to spark out. I will say that, what Alison said really resonated with me, that for us, we're making just an enormously big bet on certifiers. We believe this is the way to identify sustainable products rather than everyone creating their own bespoke way of doing it. And every product manufacturer having to figure out what Amazon wants, what another retailer wants. You can go from country to country and all figure it out. Better that we all agree that the certifying community is something we should be investing in and growing. And then we can all work from that. But for that to work, we actually need to get to impact, right? Like, this is not like make everything out of bamboo and be done. Like, it actually is like really hard to turn these efforts and desires of the public into real impact at the scale of climate change and biodiversity and human rights, which is what, I'm enormously frustrated at the pace that we're moving right now. We need to move a lot faster if we're actually going to make scale at that change at that scale. And to do that, yes, we need to know and be able to measure that impact. So we know what that did and how important that extra dollar, if the customer is going to spend it, what that did for it. And then also we need to make the technology work so that this can work a lot faster. And Alison, to your point, we've now built a database of certified products, and it's complex and manual. And this all has to be API speaking to each other. Like, we really have to future-proof this and make this go to the future where we're moving bombs between companies. We're making transparent carbon footprints. We are pushing so that this doesn't have to be people typing in and everyone having their own scientists calculating it. So that's the future. And again, if we get to impact and technology to facilitate that, we'll get there because the customer wants this.
Yes, I think that's fantastic. And it does, we all have a part to play in this for sure. And I'm excited about that because I see the same urgency that you do. But being able to come at checkout and say you've saved X, tons of carbon or, something at this purchase is going to be incredibly, I think, impactful in helping folks realize that their decisions are having an outcome here the same way they are when they're shopping for a bargain. So we want to find the best of values and how do we position that most effectively and communicate that in a way that is meaningful. So I'm looking to transition to some of the questions we received, and I'll paraphrase some of these because they intersect. But we see that cost is hugely influential in the purchasing process, particularly when we're talking at the institutional level, but so is risk. So Donna, I wanted to ask you about how responsible sourcing can focus on mitigating ESG risks in the supply chain and helping position those businesses themselves most successfully. Sorry, I think we've... Don, I'm afraid we're having a problem with your audio.
Oh, is that better?
That is better, yes.
Okay. Most corporations, their procurement professionals are focused on the E and the S, and the governance is usually handled outside of procurement. Sometimes it's integrated. In my experience, it is a bit separate. And in the environmental and the societal piece, I think most corporations are there. Responsible sourcing is, integrated into the tapestry of most procurement organizations because they are driving, a circular economy. They are accountable for cost savings, cost avoidances, ensuring, a continuity of supply. They're also responsible for making sure that everywhere along the supply chain, people are being treated with dignity and respect and being compensated for the work that they do to be part of that finished good that they're creating for the customer. So I would say with regards to mitigating risk, and, I go back to the saying, you can't boil the ocean. And again, that point on data, I think companies that are very ingrained in their philosophies with responsible sourcing, they have to look and see, are they going to go wide or are they going to go narrow and deep? And if they go into one particular area within their procurement organization and study perhaps the entire supply chain, or they want to do all their tier ones and then all their tier twos, it's really quite a corporate culture philosophy. But I think that in embracing that E and that S and responsible sourcing, you really then look and see at the environmental impact because you have your corporate goals, you have your circular, economy participation. And then on the S part, a lot of that is done by educating suppliers, and also on audits. So I think that the responsible sourcing process, once it is integrated into the procurement methodologies of a company, that is their best way to mitigate risk.
Fantastic. So we've talked about factors and drivers across all three of your perspectives, but it's also to understand roles and influencers. So I'd actually like to turn back to all of you and ask that who is ultimately the biggest driver or has the biggest lever for changing purchasing behaviors? We're talking about suppliers, consumers, investors, regulators. Which part does each stakeholder play, and how can that be mobilized to address the urgency that we face around this issue? Let's start with you, Alison.
Sure. Well, we've definitely talked about the, upwards of $580 billion in purchasing power that the federal government has as being tremendous. I guess let me answer this in a little bit different way. I just want to point out, though, that there are many market sectors for which we may not be the best to influence through procurement. For example, we only build or manage or maintain 3% of U.S. roads. Certainly there's green infrastructure legislation that could be coming, but in terms of federal purchasing power, roads, we could send a signal to the market as to best practices there. There's certainly embodied carbon issues there. And I hope that we do take advantage of our opportunity to influence that 3%. But maybe there's other sectors that need to take the lead. And I would also, maybe a bit jokingly, I was glad to hear, Donna, that you're now working a bit with the spirits industry. Another example that, while feds love a good happy hour, we typically aren't using federal dollars in that sector.
We are all glad that Donna's working in that sector, and we look forward to having the opportunity to raise a glass and celebrate some successes together with some sustainably sourced spirits in the future. So Adam, perhaps you could add on that from your perspective about the influencers and the roles that they can play to help us move this conversation forward more aggressively, more urgently.
Well, I'm speaking about Amazon Business. Obviously, corporate buyers are super important, and regulations are important to drive them, and procurement standards. So we speak every day about how the standards that exist for consumer products can fit there and make it happen. So those are drivers. In most of my day to day, it's the customer. I mean, it's the customer. They care. They really care about this. And it's not just a small segment. It's big and broad. And so you might look at elements like Whole Foods, where everyone who walks in obviously is walking in for that value proposition. And that's not a small business. That's a very significant business in the United States. And then you look at across the world. In Europe, it's blowing the doors off. People really care about this. And it's not just because we want to do this, which we do, but it's because the customers are demanding this. They are being very loud. They're being very clear, and we will follow them where they're going. That is just what Amazon is built on. It's built on customer obsession. If customers want to do this, Amazon will build towards it. It happens to be the right thing to do. It happens to be completely in line with where we're setting our goals and what we're trying to do, and be the right choice. It's also in line with where regulations are heading. But what's being really moved is by customers driving based on what they want.
Fantastic. And just to add on to that, how is it that we can most effectively educate and engage customers on that? Because this is an area where we definitely hear that they care, but how is it that we equip them with the information that's going to help them take that care and to put it into practice to actually make a better decision as a result?
Well, some of that is our job of putting in front of customers. I'm not sure that they need to all educate themselves on what Cradle to Cradle is and how that's really hard and expensive. We need to simplify it and show, look, Cradle to Cradle is the right choice. This is our job to actually help you determine those things and put them in front of you. And then the consumer products manufacturers who are doing lots of advertising need to promote these benefits so that customers know to look for them on the shelf. And then we need to, again, make them available and show and make it very clear that that's there. So it sort of works in there. I think there might be too much pressure on the certifiers to be kind of shouting out. That's a lot for certifiers to bear. I think certifiers do the certifying and make sure the products are awesome, and express what the impact is. That's a huge gift to the world.
We're excited for the partnership for you to help us tell the world about this being meaningful and, celebrate the work that has been done by manufacturers and their suppliers who have done a tremendous amount of effort to improve and innovate, to optimize their products. But we need all the help we can get to channel and highlight what those successes are and what they mean. So Donna, back to you. You've talked a bit in responding to some of the previous questions about the roles that are played here, but I'd like to get a sense in terms of the relative influence. Do suppliers actually have influence in this conversation as much as the customers and the investors? Where do you see that the relevant influence play is for us to move this forward much quickly?
I definitely, mirror everything that Adam just said. Working in the food and beverage sector for many years, you would be shocked at the spikes of consumer inquiries around key holiday times that are associated with candy, especially Halloween, where consumers really want to understand how chocolate is sourced, and what are you doing to ensure child labor is not being used in the chocolate that I purchase? What are you doing with regards to, hazelnuts and vanilla, and some of the rainforest, certifications, really play an important part in that. So the certifications, I think, to Adam's point, help drive that, but it is all about the consumer. But with regards to the suppliers, suppliers are in a tricky role here, because not only are they responsible for producing, what their contract says, but they're also, to me, ethically responsible for bringing to the table innovation, and to also, to bring to their customers, better ways to do things, efficiencies, whether it be looking at long-term investments in partnerships for capital improvements, whether it be, joint ownership, at farms, having corporations getting into the ownership of farms, or teaching at the farm level how to be more efficient and effective. So I think the suppliers play an enormous role as well.
Fantastic. We're coming down to the end of our time, and unfortunately we don't have room for more questions, but I don't want to close out without asking each of you in a speed round here to just quickly provide one recommendation you would have for companies or individuals who are looking to harness the power of their purchasing capacity to advance a circular economy. So it's a big question, but just asking for one short recommendation from each of you. Adam, can we start with you?
Do it in a consistent, logical way. Use certifying organizations to help you guide that. Don't make up something bespoke for yourself.
Fantastic. Donna?
I would just sum it up with due diligence. Eliminate, innovate, and circulate.
Nice. I like it. And you, Alison?
I would say understand your spending and prioritize to get the biggest bang for your buck. Yep. Fantastic. Well, these are all among many lessons that you have shared with us today that are incredibly valuable. I want to thank you all again for sharing your experience and your expertise with us today. We value your partnership so much in our work and are extremely grateful for the opportunity to highlight your leadership in this space and to equip our community to apply these insights and recommendations to shaping their own purchasing decisions and strategies. So I thank you all very, very much, and have a wonderful day.